There is a kind of departure that makes no sound, no confrontation, no final declaration, no dramatic closing of the door, just a quiet withdrawal. One day they are still there, steady, attentive, absorbing the emotional atmosphere of the room like oxygen. And then something shifts. They are still physically present, but inwardly, something has stepped back. No explanation, no demand for closure, no visible anger. And the most unsettling part? They no longer seem bound to what once held them there. Not the conflicts, not the endless conversations, not even the relationships themselves. If you have ever felt that moment inside your own psyche, that quiet turning that cannot be reversed, you already recognize it. This is not ghosting. It is not avoidance, and it is not emotional numbness. It is something far deeper, a psychological threshold, a moment when the psyche quietly withdraws its energy from what no longer aligns with its center. And once that psychological threshold is crossed, there is no returning to who you were. Most empaths don't become distant. They become exhausted long before they disappear. Even in childhood, they became quiet observers of the emotional atmosphere, sensing that survival required constant awareness. They sensed tension before words formed. They knew when to shrink. They knew when to smooth conflict. They knew when silence was safer than truth. They understood early that what was unfolding within them was not random, but the culmination of a deeper psychic process. That harmony equals survival. So they slowly shaped themselves into bridges between parents, between friends, between chaos and calm. They became the quiet passage through which conflict could move without breaking everything apart. But there is something no one ever tells you about being the bridge. You are crossed. You are stood upon. You are relied on to hold the weight. And rarely are you ever truly inhabited. The empath doesn't collapse in one moment. They erode gradually. Micro-betrayals, invisible labor, unspoken resentments. They become the keeper of the emotional balance, quietly regulating what others cannot hold. In doing so, they inherit a burden, the task of carrying what was never consciously chosen. The unseen stabilizer, the silent therapist of other people's storms. They become the one who understands everyone, sensing what others cannot express. Yet the question lingers in the background of the psyche: who truly understands them? What remains is kindness and endurance. That question does not arrive as an explosion. It begins as a whisper. And with each effort that goes unseen, the whisper within the psyche grows harder to ignore. Here's the part no one sees. The unconscious begins preparing the psyche for separation, long before the ego is willing to acknowledge it. It first appears in dreams, through images that rise like mist from the depths of the psyche, then through the heaviness of fatigue, and finally through the body's subtle refusal to continue as before. What appears as a sudden goodbye has often been unfolding quietly for years. The nervous system starts saying, "This is costing too much." But the empath overrides it, again and again and again, until something shifts. And when it shifts, it doesn't feel like rage. It feels like stillness. Why stillness? We'll come back to that. If this resonates, you've probably heard things like, "You've changed. You used to be warmer. You're not as available. You don't care like you used to." And maybe that hurt, because you do care. You just stopped disappearing to prove it. Empathy without boundaries slowly becomes something else. Self-abandonment wearing the mask of virtue. For a long time, the empath believed this role is goodness, to understand, to accommodate, to hold space for everyone. But eventually a quiet realization begins to form within the psyche. I am needed, yet I am not truly seen. And that realization opens a fissure, not with drama, not with confrontation, quietly. What begins to fracture is the persona, that carefully constructed identity built around being the good one, the patient one, the endlessly understanding one. In Jungian terms, the persona is the mask the psyche develops to move safely through the world. For the empath, that mask often becomes the role of emotional caretaker, the stabilizer of every room. But when the mask cracks, what has been held beneath it can no longer remain contained. Resentment surfaces. Grief follows close behind. Anger appears, an anger that was never given permission to exist. And with it comes something even more unsettling. Truths that were swallowed begin to speak. At this stage, the psyche no longer asks politely for balance. It demands reorganization. This is where individuation begins. Jung spoke about the self, not the ego, but the deeper organizing center of the psyche. Most empaths live ego-organized lives. I am valuable because I'm useful. I am lovable because I'm understanding. I am good because I endure. But the self doesn't measure worth that way. The self asks one terrifying question. Who are you without the role? And when that question lands, the empath withdraws, because something new is being constructed internally. At a certain stage, a quiet threshold is crossed. Something within becomes irreversible. The empath no longer pleads for understanding. They no longer struggle to repair what refuses to transform. Old life becomes physically intolerable. Even familiar people feel foreign. To others, this shift may appear as coldness, perhaps even indifference, but it is neither. What is occurring is psychological conservation. The psyche is withdrawing its energy from fruitless negotiation. That energy is now required for a far more demanding task, the slow reconstruction of an inner center. At this point, the empath understands something essential. To continue explaining would require abandoning the truth that has finally surfaced within them. But here is the paradox. When the empath finally withdraws, why don't they return? Why not come back after time softens the conflict, after the emotions cool, after the silence settles? Why does the distance remain? Because something irreversible has already occurred within the psyche. By the time the empath leaves outwardly, an inner departure has long been unfolding. A threshold has been crossed. An illusion has dissolved. The role they once occupied can no longer be inhabited in the same way. And once the psyche sees clearly, it cannot return to the blindness that once made endurance possible. So the real question is not why they left. The real question is what happened inside them long before anyone noticed they were gone. Let's go deeper. During the solitude phase, something reorganizes at a structural level. The empath stops orienting around reaction. They begin orienting around resonance. Reaction says, fix it, soften it, repair it, prevent rupture. Resonance says, does this align? Does this expand me? Does this respect my center? That shift changes everything. Gradually, something within the nervous system begins to settle. The constant vigilance softens. The quiet scanning of every room, every tone, every expression fades. For the first time in their life, the empath sits in a room and does not absorb it. The atmosphere remains outside them. Sadness arises, and it stays on its own. Anger appears, and it no longer turns inward against the self. Silence arrives, and it no longer feels like a threat to existence. What is emerging here is something the psyche has long been moving toward: psychic autonomy, a center that is no longer organized around the emotions of others. And once that inner center stabilizes, something profound becomes clear. Returning to unconscious entanglement no longer feels merely uncomfortable. It feels suffocating. Not in a dramatic emotional sense, but in a deeper, almost biological way. The body itself begins to resist the old patterns. The psyche refuses to regress into what once demanded its constant sacrifice. What appears as calm withdrawal is simply the outer reflection of something that has already taken place within. The psyche has reorganized itself. This is why apologies often arrive too late. Because the empath is no longer asking, "Can this relationship be fixed?" They are asking, "Does this belong to who I am becoming?" Those are not the same question. When the empath finally withdraws, it is rarely impulsive. It happens when the unconscious can no longer sustain the cost of continual sacrifice. For years, the empath served as the bridge, linking one person to another, holding together tensions that might otherwise have collapsed the whole structure. But a bridge was never meant to be lived upon. Eventually, the psyche begins to resist existing only as a passage for others. Something deeper insists on a different arrangement. Instead of remaining infrastructure for everyone else's stability, the psyche begins to gather itself inward. It begins to form a center. This is the threshold, and once it is crossed, a decisive shift unfolds within the individual life. The personality that was once organized around the expectations of others begins to loosen its hold. What Carl Jung called the persona, the social mask designed to maintain harmony, can no longer contain the full movement of the psyche. Old relational myths quietly dissolve. If I leave, I will ruin everything. If I endure long enough, I will finally be appreciated. If I give more of myself, someone will eventually see me. These narratives once sustained the role, but now the psyche recognizes their cost. The persona begins to collapse, not as failure, but as necessity, because the deeper totality of the self can no longer remain confined within it. At this stage, another presence begins to emerge from the depths of the psyche: the shadow. It does not arrive with force. It speaks quietly, almost persuasively. What if this path leaves you alone? What if, without being needed, you lose your place in the world? What if independence slowly hardens into isolation? These questions arise from the darker regions of the psyche, where old fears and abandoned identities reside. The empath must face this shadow without retreating into the familiar refuge of constant connection. Because this moment requires something difficult but necessary: solitude. What Carl Jung described as the work of individuation often begins with a withdrawal of psychic energy from the outer world. The psyche gathers what was once scattered. Relationships may grow quieter. Social movement slows. Contact with others sometimes becomes minimal. From the outside, this can look like absence, but inwardly, something vital is taking place. Solitude is not emptiness. It is a period of formation. Silence is not rejection. It is the psyche containing what is still emerging. Distance is not cruelty. It is the mind restoring its inner coherence. And when this process begins to integrate, the empath becomes something they were never allowed to be before. Often those who remain behind attempt to draw the empath back into the old pattern. The invitations may arrive in many forms: guilt, nostalgia, appeals to loyalty or obligation. But these efforts rarely succeed. They speak to the ego, to roles and expectations, while something deeper in the psyche has already shifted. The empath has not lost the capacity to love. What has changed is where that love is given. It is no longer offered to structures that cannot contain it. They stop translating themselves into forms that are easier for others to accept. They stop reducing their own presence to avoid disturbance. They stop regulating emotional storms that were never truly theirs to manage. At this point, explanations begin to feel strangely unnecessary. The psyche is no longer operating from the same level of organization it once did. What emerges instead is a different pattern of relationship. Connections become fewer, but more genuine. Trust grows slowly, but it carries depth. Boundaries stand without constant justification. Silence no longer seeks reassurance. Compassion remains, but it no longer requires self-erasure. If you have crossed this threshold, it may feel disorienting. From the outside, such distance can appear cold. But within the psyche, something very different is occurring. Integration. An integration often feels like withdrawal to those who are accustomed to your fragmentation. Language struggles to bridge this divide. When two people are organized around different psychic centers, words cannot easily translate between them. To observers, the separation may seem harsh. To the psyche, it is simply the natural consequence of growth. The empath does not withdraw because love has vanished. They withdraw because love alone cannot sustain environments that demand continual self-abandonment. What has occurred is not disappearance. You didn't abandon them. It is consolidation. Energy that was once dispersed across countless relationships has been gathered inward. This is the quiet return to an inner center. And once a person experiences that sense of coherence, something fundamental changes. Belonging everywhere loses its appeal when one has finally learned how to belong to oneself. In the language of depth psychology, the psyche gradually begins to prefer wholeness over harmony. That's why you don't go back. Not because you hate the past, but because the person who once lived comfortably inside that arrangement no longer exists.